Right, so yes, my name's Ed, and I'm based up here as a VIO up in sunny Yorkshire. So today I'm just going to be talking to you about scanning surveillance at APHA. So firstly, I just wanted to discuss what is surveillance. So it's sometimes useful to go back to the word itself. So surveillance comes from French, surveiller, to watch over. So what are we watching over? Well, what we're trying to do is we're seeking answers to key questions about veterinary and public health. And that's going to be looking at detection of changes in infection or disease over time. So the WHO has provided a bit more of a definition, and they describe surveillance as the ongoing systematic collection, analysis, and interpretation of data, and the dissemination of information to those who need to know in order to take action. And I think those last parts are really important. It's not that we're just here to try and hoard data and not do anything with it, or that we're wanting to keep it for ourselves. The key thing for us is that we get that information that we get out of it out to those who can do something about it. Now, there are a couple of different mechanisms of surveillance that you might have come across back in your undergraduate days. And I'd say one of those APHA is quite known for in terms of its notifiable disease sort of things, and that's mandatory surveillance. You've got a legal requirement to report that. But that's something we're not really going to touch on much today, because what we're going to be looking at is scanning surveillance. And that's looking to detect new, unusual, or changing patterns of disease. And these are sometimes referred to as new and re-emerging threats. So what types of new and re-emerging threats, or NRTs, as we love our acronyms, are there? So the first one, it has cropped up again, notifiable disease. And that's not what we in the Veterinary Investigation Centre are here for, but it may be that if we get a stillborn calf in, when we open up the head, there's a hydranencephaly, and we have to consider blue tongue or something similar. It may be that we're looking for new diseases or pathogens. So, for example, when Schmallenberg came up in Europe, and that was detected by their scanning surveillance. Maybe changes in patterns or trends of endemic diseases across the country. Or it may even be exotic disease that we've not seen in GB. So there was a pseudovirus detected in 2020 in blackbirds in London for the first time. It may be a new strain of infection already in GB, so looking at, for example, swine influenza when H1N1 pandemic strain came in 2009. Or it might be new, rare, or unusual resistances to veterinary medicines. So in the photo, we've got colistin discs on a disc diffusion testing, and you can see we have resistance there. So that was back in 2015, that was detected. Or it could be more along the human health concern, so with zoonoses or things like lead toxicities. And these are all different types of new and re-emerging threats that we monitor and look into. So how do we do it? So as I said, this is about APHA. So I'm afraid for anyone north of the border in Scotland, it's a slightly different system up there. And we're going to be focusing on England and Wales. And what scanning surveillance, we have a non-statutory form of surveillance. So there's no legal requirement to submit things. And it uses samples received for routine diagnostic testing from animals across England and Wales. And we deliver it through this network of veterinary investigation centres in England and Wales, as well as, and you can see we've got 6 here. So we've got Starcross, Bury St Edmunds, Carmarthen, Shrewsbury, Thirsk and Penrith. And some of them, like Starcross, Penrith and Carmarthen, might have as well laboratories on site where they can carry out further testing. We also have a central laboratory down at Weybridge, and we have a laboratory up at Lasswade, which does a lot of poultry work. And we also have 8 partner post-mortem providers. So the vet schools are very well represented. And we've got also the Welsh Veterinary Surveillance Centre and SRUC do a little bit up north. And you can see on this map, we've got the green areas, which are APHA centres, the blue, which are our third-party providers. And then these yellow areas are for those that farmers where they're maybe a bit too far to deliver things themselves. And so we offer a free-to-farmer carcass collection to make sure that everyone can have access to these services. And we have an oversight by the Surveillance Intelligence Unit. And when we triage and risk assess any submissions, something that may come up is if we have anything that we think is unusual, for example, whether it's treatment failures or an unusual presentation, we can raise that with the Surveillance Intelligence Unit and just flag to them that there may be something interesting. So where does scanning surveillance fit in, and what does it actually what are we looking at? And what we've got here is what's often referred to as the surveillance pyramid. Now, it's not hierarchical. We're not saying anything's kind of better, and we're not wanting to be sat at the top just saying, well, look at us, we're the best. But what it's doing is just showing where our surveillance data kind of fits into the population. So if you've got all animals in a population, well, only some of those will have a particular disease. And in fact, only some of those with that disease are going to be detected by the farmer. It may be others are slightly more subclinical or just aren't being noticed. Now, of those that are detected by the farmer, only some are going to be necessarily put forward to the vet. It may be the farmer otherwise thinks they've got their own diagnosis, or they're happy describing it as lameness. So you end up with a clinical syndrome or a kind of proxy recorded by the farmer. But if it gets to the vets, then you as the vet might say, well, yeah, I'm happy to diagnose this as this particular syndrome or a particular diagnosis of foot rot or whatever. So it may be that it stops there. Or it may be in some cases that if you've done a PM on farm and you've got pneumonia, but you want to find what it is, you may sample it. And so that's where we can keep getting that clinical syndrome or diagnosis. Now, of those samples, we're aware we're not the only labs around. So it may be that we only receive a small portion or a certain percentage of the samples. And of those samples, only some will actually have a diagnosis made. And it's these top two where kind of we're involved, where we record our diagnoses and get that surveillance data. So you can see we only see a part of the picture, and we are very much aware of that. So we always want to make sure that we're maintaining that dialogue with industry, be it with vets and farmers, to make sure that what we're seeing is representative, or if it's not, look into why. So I just want to give you a quick snapshot of what we actually do at the VI centres. So this is Thirsk. I'm just showing off our lovely building here. And anyone based in North Yorkshire is welcome to call in. So if you're interested in making a submission, the first thing to do will be to give us a call. Now, you might be just wanting to discuss something that you've already sent in. It might be you wanting to send something in, or you might just want to say, look, I saw something really weird on the farm. I've got some pictures. Can I send them over to you? And we're really keen for that. We're really happy. We're here to talk. We are kind of happy to be your first port of call with some of those. Now, if you are calling to submit something, what are we going to ask you for? And it can sometimes seem a bit of interrogation, because what we want to get as much info as we can. So firstly, we'll be wanting the farm name and ideally a CPH if you've got it, but at least a postcode. And that's to make sure we get that geographical information and we know what's coming in from where, and we can check to see whether we've got any risks. Are they under TB restrictions? Is there going to be anything like that? We then want some individual animal information. What sort of age is it coming in? Are we going to be expecting a big adult stock bull, or is it just a young calf? And in some situations, it may be worth knowing whether it's coming in live or dead, as we are able to submit have some live submissions for certain conditions, in which case we then euthanize them on site. And if it is dead, what time did it die? Is it a week old and a bit of a space hopper at this point and really not going to be much use to anyone? Or is it something fresh that we think we can get a good diagnosis from? So, and then we'll ask about what clinical signs have been seen, how many have been affected, all of that normal clinical history. And key as well is the treatments and vaccinations, because it's useful to know for bacteriology if it's received any antimicrobials. And we'll also want to know your point of view from the vet side of things. Do you have any particular concerns? Do you know the history of this farm? What's been going on there? But one thing to flag is, as said, we aren't really the people involved on the notifiable disease side. That's our colleagues in the field service of APHA. And so any suspect notifiable disease cases should be reported by, in England, calling the Deaf Services helpline, or in Wales, contacting that number, and both are available to find on gov.uk. So let's say that we've said, yeah, absolutely, we welcome that carcass in. What will happen next is the carcass should hopefully arrive, and that might be through our carcass collection service, or it might be the farmer bringing it themselves. And we'll then have a chat with the farmer and take their history and make sure we complete our submission form. And it's incredible how different sometimes you can get the histories between the two. And one thing to flag, I'll put my government vet hat on here and say the submission form is key, as data entered onto it feeds into our surveillance database, which is called Farm File. And so, as I said, with my government vet hat on, love of paperwork, these submission forms provide us with a wealth of information. And that can be herd details and the kind of epidemiology, the clinical signs. And the key thing with this is it doesn't just inform kind of our database, it informs our interpretation of the test results. So in terms of giving you value for money and actually helping you reach a diagnosis, we need to have that information. Was the sheep scoured? How old was it? What's going on there? So it's really key that these are completed, because then these also do feed into our farm file database. And just to reassure you that there's complete confidentiality between ourselves and yourselves, and that should hopefully maintain farmer confidence. There's not going to be, they aren't going to be broadcast far and wide. And just a little aside here is that when submitting samples, you can use our online animal disease testing service, ADTS. So that's an online paperless sample submission service. You've got easy access to all the test details, turnaround times, prices. You can track your test progress. You get email notifications. And we even give you free of charge postage when using ADTS. And there's a wonderful guide by Harriet, which gives you a list, and it's on YouTube, that you can see for a quick kind of whistle-stop tour of what ADTS looks like. And if you're interested, you can go on the Gov.uk website, search for Animal Disease Testing Service, and you can register interest there. So we've got the sample, we've got the animal. Now, if it's coming live, as I said, we do sometimes get them in live, then we'll do a clinical exam and then carry out euthanasia. After that, the post-mortem examination will be undertaken, and we'll record any gross post-mortem findings to report back to yourselves. And we will try and take photos if there's interesting findings as well. Now, samples, we'll take samples and we'll do the appropriate testing that will kind of be informed by our assessment of things, and also we'll have discussed things with yourselves. And we'll report back, we'll report to you with our initial PM findings. And you can see in some cases, like here on the right, we do get wildlife in. As a member of a wildlife group, I thought I'd flag this. And you can see we do have to take health and safety seriously. So these were swans in for avian influenza. So we have to don our spacesuit helmets and get cracking. So the investigation continues, and as results come back, we report those out to you. We'll put comments to kind of help your interpretation and send those out to you. And once we reach a diagnosis and reach the end of things, from your side of things, from the private vet point of view, that's sort of it. You need to deal with things on farm and take that and apply it to your farm. From our side of things, that's where our kind of surveillance side of things really begins. So then we, as the VIO, we have to review that case and we assign it a veterinary investigation diagnosis analysis code, or a VIDA code. Now, each VIDA code has specific diagnostic set criteria that we need to meet, and this is kind of a picture of, you can see we've got what you need and any notes, etc. And the key thing is, it's to try and ensure consistency. So if I'd found this, so we've got some lovely autofluorescence of this sheep brain here. Now, if I find that at postmortem, I might immediately be thinking, right, CCN, brilliant, interesting, that's what I'm really suspicious of. But if I wanted to VIDA code this, I need to do histopathology, which will then help give us further ideas as potential sources, and also make sure it actually is cerebral cortical necrosis. So I can't just do it off the autofluorescence. I have to do that histopath if I want to VIDA code it as that. And that's the same whether it's up here in North Yorkshire or down at Starcross or over in Wales in Carmarthen. So it ensures that consistency. And then that code can then be matched up to our data on farm file to provide the surveillance data that we have. We do also record the diagnoses not reached, because that's really useful. We can see if there's a pattern. Are we getting lots of neurological diseases where we aren't getting an answer? Why not? We can go back and review those cases and see what's going on. So now we've got several different bits of data. Let's see where we go from here. So we've got our farm file data, which is all of that stuff from the submission form. We've got our VIDA data from the post-mortem. And what we then need to do is we need to think about it, we analyze it, and we then can produce some outputs, and we can look at all of that with our species expert group and other information and other sources. So that's where our species expert groups come in. So we've got 6 species expert groups, and they've each got a veterinary lead. So we've got cattle, small ruminant, pig, avian, miscellaneous and exotic farm species, and wildlife. Now, membership of these expert groups is quite varied, and there's quite a lot of representation from APHA, and that's including veterinary. We've got our scientists, we've got the international disease monitoring team, and I'll touch on them in the next slide. We've got policy, we've got discipline champions like parasitologists and toxicologists. But we also accept that, you know, we can't do this alone. We need to know what's going out in the real world, as it were. So we've got non-APHA representation as well. So we've got people from the livestock industry, we've got people from the universities and academia, we've got people from the specialist vet divisions, the Pig Veterinary Society, Sheep Veterinary Society, etc. And we also have other government bodies like the Veterinary Medicines Directorate. And all of these people feed into the different expert groups. And the summary of what the expert groups are actually looking to do is they're looking to detect new and re-emerging animal-related threats, provide some of that species-based expertise, both within APHA, but also DEFRA itself, and develop our surveillance and knowledge exchange networks, so kind of getting out into the community, getting our information out there, and to try and maintain and develop that expertise both within and outside of APHA. So making sure kind of our VIOs that we know what we're talking about, and then trying to pass that knowledge on to yourselves so that you know what you're talking about. I mentioned other sources of information in the International Disease Monitoring Team, and they do something very important called scanning, horizon scanning. So this can be defined, if you choose to, as the systematic outlook to detect early signs of potentially important developments. What it does is it's looking at lots of different sources for potential future threats. And they can then use this to assess the potential risk and whether there may be requirement for more targeted surveillance. So for example, with the avian influenza, here you can see this is a map with kind of the migration pathways of wild birds, mapping of positive wild bird cases. You can see it going across Europe, and that might inform as to when we might want to kind of increase our sensitivity for avian influenza in wild birds and start making sure that we've got our wild bird surveillance in order. So we've had our case, it's come through, we've detected a new hazard or threat with our scanning surveillance. And where do we go from there? How do we act on that? Well, firstly, if we've detected our threat, we then need to try and characterize it and actually kind of drill down to what it really is. And it may have come in either with a post-mortem submission, it may have been a phone call with yourselves, it may have been something that was brought up at one of the species expert groups, but we then need to really characterize what's the problem. So that might be with our epidemiologists, or it might be laboratory based with pathologists and scientists, or further farm visits, or it might be research based, kind of going to the academics. And once we've characterized that threat, there then needs to be a risk assessment. So that can be, and that can involve a variety of different people. It might be people in the veterinary risk group, or if it's a zoonotic threat, there may be human animal infection risk surveillance group, or HARES, or it might be involving the chief veterinary officers and ministers. But it needs to be decided, how serious is this threat? What's the risks? And once that's been decided, you can then take the correct action, whether that's putting in mitigation or looking to control it. And always key is that communication. So making sure that we get out to industry, whether it's through the vet record, whether it's through conferences or peer-reviewed papers, and getting all that information out. But we also need to make sure that information is disseminated within government as well. So once we've got that threat, and as said, communication is really key. So we do produce a number of different reports. So we do a monthly one, your local VI centre will produce that. We also do a quarterly one, and that's based on your species expert groups, and they're available on gov.uk, and a really interesting resource. And you've got different alerts as well. We do try and do information notes, kind of relevant ones, depending on what we think might be upcoming risks for the current season, etc. And the gov.uk and Vet Gateway are really good sources for this. And we've also got some government blogs, which again can be really interesting. There's industry and sector group alerts, and they may be sent out kind of via some of the specialist veterinary sectors as well. And we try and attend vet and farmer meetings and conferences and make sure that we have good representation in some of the veterinary literature as well. So we do try and make sure that we cover a wide base that you do come across the work we do and our findings. So in order to help you come across it, here are just a couple of sources that you might want to investigate. So we've got a YouTube channel, and as said, you've got your ADTS video on there, but a number of other different ones. So that's really worth checking out. And the APHA Vet Gateway under surveillance, there's an awful lot of resources there and a good few links. So if you've not explored the Vet Gateway, really highly recommend you do. The animal disease surveillance reports, that's things like the emerging threat reports, those quarterly ones. And if you've got a particular species of interest, highly recommend you have a little look at that. There's some really interesting bits and pieces on there, and it kind of lets you know what's going on, kind of what some of the thoughts at an industry level and potential upcoming threats we're looking at. That's a link to the ADTS service, as I've said. And this one, the Livestock and Wildlife Disease Diagnosis guidebook is really, really helpful have it printed out in the back of your car or have it bookmarked on your phone, and it can just give you a guide if you're doing postmortems on farm. If you've got pneumonia in a calf, what samples might you want, what testing might you want to do. If you've got a scouring pig, what samples might you like, what testing would you like to do. It just helps give you a bit of a guiding nudge as to where you might want to start thinking. So it provides a really useful resource there. There's also a price list, which you're always welcome to give us a call and ask for price, but if you want to look up yourself, there's that, and it gives you as well the turnaround times.